Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is the work session of the Pitkin County Commissioners, Tuesday, August 15th. Up first, we have a review of future agenda calendars. And Kara, do you have anything for us you want to?
I do, which I don't have the future agendas. So last week, John shared interest in a budget mini retreat, and so we were looking at the morning of September 19th from 9 until noon, or the morning of September 26th. And just wanted to confirm with the board members present, I guess we'll have to follow up, is there either, we would prefer September 19th, but we want to make sure that we have a full board available on either of those dates.
Right, I'm planning to be here the 19th. Okay. Steve, is the 19th of September okay for you? He's checking.
Sadly, I have no travel planned for the rest of the year.
You'll find some.
Yeah, just checking here. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Right, okay.
We'll confirm with Francie and Patty first, but just tentatively hold the mornings of the 19th and the 26th.
I'm actually, let's see, I think I'm leaving, just so you know. We have a plan to leave on around October 3rd, I believe. So I'm going to be gone, but I can probably call in occasionally. Let me just find that real quick, and I'll get back to you with specific dates. Let's see if I can if I'm on the calendar yet. Sometime between the 3rd and the 14th, I'm probably going to be gone, but I'll confirm that. But right now we're good.
Okay.
For the 19th, I'm good.
Okay.
And Kelly's okay too? All right. Anything else?
Just Rich is saying there's no camera showing the room on Zoom.
Oh, you're right. We're blacked out.
And the sound is really funny. It's like not the usual sound we get.
Doesn't sound like Francie?
Kind of echoey or something.
Yeah, you definitely don't sound like Francie there, Greg.
Thanks. Thanks, Rich. Although we've been confused in public.
Yeah, we just don't have any visual for the Pitkin County Zoom one or the speaker laptop yet, so.
Right. We're working on it. Okay, anything else?
That is the only item for me on future agendas.
Okay, that's all you have. I did want to say on October 3rd, I anticipate, and I think it may already be on, or Charlotte knows about it. We've got Safe Passages is coming in to present on that morning about wildlife, the report they had on wildlife migration routes in the valley. And they are on the calendar to come in on October 3rd. But I don't know, just wanted to tell you that.
I wanted to see if the board had interest. Usually APSHA comes to us for budget stuff earlier than our budget process, because the city's budget process timing is a little bit different. And I wanted to see, I think last year we did more of a general report about kind of the year-over-year bids and sales and like a data dump and a bit of a compliance update. And I wondered if the board would be interested in making sure those are kind of either scheduled at the same time if there's time, or figuring out time for both of those conversations.
I think that'd be great.
Okay.
I'd be in favor of that. Okay. Nothing else? We've got some minute time to kill. We could start early, but if anybody's planning to be here at 3:15, they may be.
And since you didn't get the file, what I can do is I can just connect and try to project.
Got it, okay. Yeah, we'll get you sorted out here then.
That works. Yeah, that works.
You've got a little time here, so that's fine.
I apologize, but
No problem. We're doing fine.
we got stuck behind construction.
She came over the pass and there was
Right, oh, right, the delay on the pass.
stuff.
And Dan, welcome, come on up.
Good afternoon. Jackie.
How do I connect to your meeting so that I can?
You want to plug into with your iPad, is that the idea?
Sure.
That requires technical skill that someone else has, thankfully.
That's what's going on.
Kara, can I ask a question? Did we, and I don't need it answered now, but I was scheduling things for the
I should be able to.
second week of
download it.
November, which is Election Day, falls that Tuesday. And I don't have any updated calendar
there's an
invites, so I don't
agenda. Do you have
know,
an agenda for
I
this
don't
meeting?
remember what we decided to do for that
Oh, wait,
Tuesday.
this is not.
It will follow.
Um,
Here we go, Jackie.
Is it?
I fear I may have scheduled something on Wednesday.
Did you ask our AD?
Here it is. There's the Zoom.
Yep. Okay. Zoom.
She's gonna zoom in.
Okay, how's the audio, Steve? Can you hear me all right?
Oh, one more thing on future agendas.
No, it's terrible.
The audio's not good.
Something-
Something's wrong.
Something, yeah, you're really echoing. Some of the mics are cutting out in the room. They're not like consistent voices.
Well, okay, we've got to sort that out. Do we need to turn it off and reboot or something? Or we've got an audio issue and a picture issue. We might need to reboot or
Break?
if Kelly has one more thing for future agendas. Go ahead.
I just noted that the EOTC meeting was still noticed, but I thought we got a note canceling that.
That's right.
So
Okay.
for next, for 2 weeks from now.
Oh, there it is. I see the telltale unplugged cord. Aha. Let's see if that does it.
It's hard to get them to work wireless. So we have another device connected to us.
And I just, yeah,
Connected to Zoom.
Are you, yeah,
You just turned your volume,
I did. I disconnected my volume so you don't have that problem.
but can you project, can you actually
But
present?
can I project from here?
That's what the question you have to ask him. He's
Yeah.
he's the guru.
Can I be allowed?
Your
to
voices are
project
clear
from
now.
the screen?
Great, thank you. Yeah, they plugged something in and fixed something. Now we're plugging in video.
Don't have that on.
Oh, gotcha, yep, yep.
There's no ability given.
So we're setting up a screen share. We're still a couple minutes ahead of schedule, believe it or not. So we're supposed to start this at
I should have been
3:15.
as Jennifer.
Rich, unless you have future agendas to talk about, we're killing time here till we get this sorted out.
Still need video that we're trying to figure out.
Geez, Greg, I wish I had something for you, but I don't believe I do.
I am Jennifer.
Can you promote Francie too?
More, show captions.
You could find me a new windshield for my. You have?
It's gonna reconnect.
There we go. We found Jennifer.
All right. And then.
Okay, Francie's on. All right.
Share.
and I'm
I've been
gonna
on, I just
share
was
Oh.
silent and unseen.
Screen.
Stealthy, are you?
Yes.
I think we're supposed to start at 3, not 3:15.
Well, the meeting starts at 3 with the upcoming agenda items. We've done that, and now we're going to start the airport thing at 3:15.
Greg, can we confirm
Okay.
with Francie on
Oh,
the
and
27th?
so Francie,
Actually,
oh, go ahead, Rich.
we can actually see the slide presentation that's getting ready to take place with Jennifer.
Great,
now.
excellent, okay.
Any consolation?
Yep, we're getting closer. The video's up. Okay, we're in business. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, team, keeping the wheels on. Okay, so welcome back. We had one more future agenda thing. Francie, on the 19th of September, we're talking about a mini retreat to talk about budget. The second option is the 26th. But they would prefer the 19th. We discussed this last week. Just wanted to confirm that the 19th is okay for you in the morning.
It would be
Give me 1 second to check my calendar. Okay. The 19th is what they prefer. You mean in the morning and then have a regular meeting in the afternoon, or?
Yep.
What?
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, good. That's what we're doing. Great. Okay. And that's it for future agenda items. So I'm going to move us on. We're a couple minutes ahead of schedule, but I'm assuming anybody who wanted to be here would check in a little early. I think you can hear us now and you can see us. So I'm going to introduce our team for the airport with a special presentation today on sustainable aviation fuel. We have Dan Bartholomew with us and Jackie Francis, and our guest today is Jennifer Holmgren from LanzaTech. And Dan, I think you should take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So Dan Bartholomew, Airport Director. So Jackie Francis, the Chair of Airport Advisory Board, put together this introduction with Dr. Jennifer Holmgren to discuss sustainable aviation fuel and that technology. So I think I'll turn it over to Jackie if you want to tell us a little bit about Dr. Holmgren, and we can go from there.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Dan.
Sure.
So, many of you know that my organization, the Global Warming Mitigation Project, runs a prize called the Keeling Curve Prize, which is an international climate solutions prize. And over the last 6 years, we've had 60 winners to date, and Jennifer's team at LanzaTech was an early winner, I think maybe the first year. And since they've been a winner of the Keeling Curve Prize, they've gone on to become a publicly traded company, and they are a leader in the world of sustainable aviation fuel. And I'll let her talk a little bit more about the progress that's been made over the last few years. And then, of course, we have a lot of questions. But Jennifer and I, over the years, have gotten to be friendly, and I really, really respect her work highly.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I would add that I greatly respect your work.
Thank you.
I looked at the questions. I appreciate them being sent in advance. I prepared a presentation, but I also try to address some of the questions during the presentation. And I think the first one that I'm going to try to address is, and it's going to be slow, it's a really big file, is why am I here other than that Jackie invited me? In 2006, I got a call from a program manager at DARPA who said, Jennifer, we need to make drop-in aviation fuels. Right now, if we use biofuels, which is the only alternative to fossils, I can fly a plane from Cleveland to Cincinnati. We need the energy density of hydrocarbon fuels. I was working at a company that did catalysis for the petroleum industry, and I said, yeah, we can do that. And what you see in the video, in the picture, is actually, I partnered with Boeing, U.S. Air Force, and the Navy. And what we did is, in a 4-year period, develop a route to make sustainable aviation fuels using fats, oils, and greases. And that's what people are flying on today. We got it certified by ASTM, allowing it to fly at a 50-50 blend. At the time, there was no path for anything other than fossil to be used in an airplane. And in 2010, on April, on Earth Day, we flew the Green Hornet. We went supersonic. And so anyways, that's how I got my start in aviation fuel. And I would argue that's also how sustainable aviation fuel got its start. And but oils, fats, and greases, the world uses 100 billion gallons per year of aviation fuel. Fats, oils, and greases aren't going to get you there, right? And so while I had developed that technology, my view was, and that's why I moved to LanzaTech, is maybe if we could use waste carbon resources, there's enough waste carbon above ground that we could potentially compete with the magnitude of the aviation industry. Before I tell you what LanzaTech does, I want to tell you about sustainable aviation fuel. It's 2%. Aviation fuel is 2% of the world's global emissions. ICAO, which is the UN's International Aviation Organization, has set 3 aspirational goals for itself. They expect to have carbon neutral growth by 2020 and net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But if you look at the map on the right, what you see is the aviation industry's view of how you get there from here. And what you're seeing is, in red, operational improvements. I'll talk about...
Blow that up a little bit. Is there any way you can zoom
Move the
in?
thumb tiles.
I just don't know how to get rid of your images. If you could... Yeah,
There you go.
thank you. So if you look at the red, that's operational improvements. I'll talk a little bit about what that is. I'll also talk about aircraft technology. But the big bite is that green block. And that's the aviation industry's view between now and 2035, what has to contribute to get us there. And it's sustainable aviation fuels.
When you say carbon neutral growth from 2020 onwards, is this an old slide?
No, that 2020 is actually quite important because they use 2019 as the baseline for measuring aviation's emissions, and so all the targets on reduction are based on that.
Got it. Thank you.
Just gotta get my computer to, you know, I because I had sent the file or tried to, I'm gonna try a different thing. This will be easier this way. It's just, I'm gonna flip through it this way. Okay, so the thing about CORSIA though, and this is important because you'll note that the European Commission and other countries are setting their own standards. CORSIA only regulates, these standards are only related to international air travel, okay? The obligation is based on emissions, on international emissions only on those international flights. They did not feel they could regulate in country. They were actually sued not to regulate in country, and so they're only regulating international aviation.
What percentage of aviation is that?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
All right.
And what ends up happening is through CORSIA, the airlines will not report. They will report to their countries. Their countries will report to CORSIA. And that's a very important element because your own country will be policing you. We are in what is known as the voluntary phase of CORSIA. But if your country volunteered, then every airline that flies in and out of that country is obligated, okay? So it's not optional if your country has volunteered. The US is a member. In 2027, this will become mandatory, and you will have to have these reductions unless you're a small developing country or an island state. Everybody else will be obligated. This is again quite important. This is the aviation industry regulating itself. These are the contributions I mentioned early: new technologies, aviation fuel infrastructure, offsetting. And this is the pie as the aviation industry sees it. If you look at carbon capture, in other words, offsetting, buying emissions, or carbon capture and sequestration, there is an expectation that it will have a 20% impact. I think you saw last week the US DOE announced $1.2 billion for direct air capture to try to incentivize direct air capture in the United States and accelerate its implementation. This is not going to contribute till the end. Getting something going now will not contribute for another 10 to 20 years. Operations and infrastructure. These are the things airlines can do. Put some winglets on. But you stop and think about the number. It's only about 3%. If you talk to somebody in aviation, they'll tell you that making a plane change that has an impact, if they get to 5% impact, that's a massive impact. So this will contribute, but it will not be a massive deal.
Excuse me just a sec. Is there any way we can remove the little picture-in-picture frame? I don't think we need that. If we could remove.
Let me see. It's because I'm sharing screen.
Oh, sorry. I hope I didn't just. No, I don't think it'd be you, Jennifer. I think it's from our AV.
You think it's okay?
So if you'll go back to what you
let
had.
me try something. Let me. Here. No, I
It's back.
can't get
Okay,
rid
all
of
right,
you.
not to worry. All right. I was just
I'm
hoping
so
we weren't missing
sorry.
anything. That's all right. Okay.
I apologize that
Sorry.
I
Keep going.
don't have my computer with me. Okay, so, but this is actually quite important, right? These are the things we can do. This is low-hanging fruit, right? You know, lightweight seating. And then the big pie, right? You know, 65% is sustainable aviation fuel. This is what we're all betting on as being important in the next years, okay? All those pictures I showed you of the work I had done, I ended in 2010. So you're starting to see about 20 to 30 million gallons of the 100 billion we have to replace over a 10-year period. But you need to think this about technology adoption curves are always exponential, right? So 10 years to get to 20 million gallons, it'll be 2 more years and you'll be at much more than that, right? So think of yourselves of getting in that curve. And so the hope is that we will be able to achieve the substitution that we need with sustainable aviation fuels. I got a question in the notes, but also, of course, it's the important question to ask is, what about new technology? And remember that aviation is about weight. And so it's energy density, right? Getting a plane up in the sky is about the energy density and the fuel that powers it. And there is an expectation that electric aviation will start to play a role in small aircraft for short haul. This is going to be important in carbon reduction. By 2030, there is an expectation we'll start to see some hydrogen planes. But look at the number of seats and look at the flight time expectations even by 2035. Again, if you gotta get across the pond, you've got to focus on sustainable aviation fuel. Right. I do want to just say a few words. We focus a lot on greenhouse gases, absolutely number one priority. But I want you to also consider that a synthetic aviation fuel, 90% of the ones produced today are actually paraffinic. They do not have aromatics. What that means is they have lower particulate emissions, they have no sulfur, and they also result in less contrails. We've shown that with work we did with NRC Canada. So if you consider yourself an aviation authority, there is additional impact beyond just the greenhouse gases. And I think this is really important. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to get aromatics into aviation fuel, okay? And I would argue that what we need is the airlines to consider, I mean, it's the OEMs, and they're working on this, that 100% kerosene without, sustainable aviation kerosene without the aromatics is where we want to go. And I can tell you that Boeing and Airbus are both working on making sure that the O-rings, which are the biggest problem in the fuel systems, enable the use of 100% of these synthetic kerosenes that do not include aromatics and therefore will reduce soot formation.
If you hold on just a sec, I want to just throw questions. If Steve may have a question or Francie online, I just yell at us. We can't see you, but you could yell if you want to ask a question. Of course, I want to ask what an aromatic is and why does it matter?
Okay. An aromatic is a ring. So a synthetic paraffinic kerosene does not have any rings. It's linear and isomerized branch hydrocarbons. Aromatics are rings. They burn dirty, okay? And they produce soot. But the reason they're necessary is because O-rings swell in a specific way when you have aromatics. And what that means is, you don't want a leaky plane, a leaky fuel system. But there are ways to solve that problem, and these are things that, like I said, Boeing and Airbus are working on because they understand the benefits of this. And as I mentioned, the other benefit is these fuels are absolutely clean. There is no sulfur. And so that's important, again, for acidity in our skies and all of the things that people care about when they live near an airport.
Thank you.
Greg,
Yes,
I
Steve.
do have a question.
Steve, go ahead.
I remember research about contrails, and at one point it said that over the North Atlantic, the contrails had increased the cloud cover something like a huge percent, 80% or something, just from the contrails going across the North Atlantic. What effect do the contrails have on global warming and the amount of sun reaching the Earth, or are they one of the things that trap the heat that can't escape from the Earth? Could you go into that a little bit more detail?
I will say it only at a very high level. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm a catalyst person. But what I understand is that contrails, depending on the altitude, have an impact on greenhouse gases, that they can be heat trapping. You may have seen that contrails, people talk about contrails over the ocean, but I think what they're talking about is sulfur emissions, and there's a view that the new regulations that prevent sulfur in boats, shipping, are reducing the cloud cover, and it's hurting actually. But now that that's gone, it's actually increasing climate impact. That's what we're seeing increase. That is something that's being debated right now. My understanding is the impact is not as big. People are just saying, well, we don't have that much cloud cover anymore because of sulfur, but the reality is we're dumping a lot of carbon in the air, and that's the biggest problem. And most climate scientists would say that. And contrails at the wrong altitude have heat trapping effect.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I want to talk about e-fuels because that's the new sexy thing. Okay, and I think it's really important to talk about the new things and make sure that we understand how far away we are from them. So what is an e-fuel? What is an electrofuel? Basically, you use carbon dioxide and water and electricity to make the sustainable aviation fuel. And these things can be called e-fuels, power to X, power to liquids, whatever. But really, the thing is that carbon dioxide is a very difficult molecule to convert. And because of that, you need a lot of electricity. So as the power grid gets greener, these are going to be much more impactful. The only thing you have to always remember is that hydrogen is often, if not always, required. And if you need hydrogen and you need green hydrogen, you need water. So make sure that you've considered that in how you're thinking about making these holy grail fuels, okay? Is that you're going to need a lot of green hydrogen. But these will all contribute, and if there's any message that I can share with you, is that we're going to need it all. The petroleum industry is a centralized production based on one feedstock and one product. That's not the future. If we're going to start using waste or we're going to start using other resources, we're going to need to throw all of them at the wall and see how many will help us fly. The beauty of this is, of course, that you can take CO2 either from a flue stack or directly from the air. As direct air capture develops, you can add hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, you recycle that. And so now you've closed the loop. Because at the end of the... Oh, I'm sorry, yes?
Can you mute, Francie, or did you have a question? Okay, yeah, keep going, you're good.
Okay, what I was going to say is even sustainable aviation fuel, I said it was a hydrocarbon, you burn it, right? So even if you make it from a lower carbon resource, you're still making the same amount of CO2. To get the same energy density, you burn as much carbon. And so what that means is you better figure out how to capture it and reuse it. I have some slides which I'm not going to go through. I can leave you with this deck if you
Great,
guys
thank you.
want it.
That'd be nice.
And,
I'd like to
but
see
I,
it.
I have a whole explanation about aviation fuel, what's important, like flash point, freeze point, all of the properties that are important in making a sustainable aviation fuel, why it's different than gasoline, the fact that there's a massive market potential. Right now, just so you know, this is quite important, the target for 2030 is 10% substitution. So of the 100 billion gallons we use, when I get to 10 billion gallons, there is
100 billion.
100 billion gallons we have to, I'm sorry, let me try this again, my brain. The goal is 10%, so it's 10 billion gallons per year, because that's the total use. Thank you for making me stop. So 100 billion gallons of aviation fuel used today, 10 billion gallons is the goal by 2030. Today we're making 20 to 30 million. The gap is massive. We need to get our act together and start moving. We should also point out that the more ambitious groups, there's a few corporates that have pledged to get to 30% by 2030. So 30 billion gallons per year. And there's a lot of coalitions led by a lot of groups that you would recognize working very hard to try to create this low-carbon aviation fuel economy. There's a lot of things, if you were to adopt this at your airport, in how the fuel is blended. Until very recently, you couldn't put this fuel in a pipeline. Now you're starting to be able to do that. So getting it to an airport and being able to blend it and get it on a plane, it's all governed by ASTM certification. I won't go into it today, but I have drawn it out for you so you have it as a reference point, and I'm happy to answer questions later. The only other comment I would make is we're living in a great time. The United States, unlike Europe, doesn't use a whip, it uses a carrot. And the carrots right now are quite nice. And the IRA has brought in a lot of incentives for using green hydrogen, capturing carbon, and producing sustainable aviation fuel. So these things are all in play. And I know it's not true in Colorado, but in Illinois, the governor and legislator have passed an incentive that's almost $1.50, an additional $1.50 a gallon to try to incentivize production in Illinois and use in Illinois. So this is quite important, as you know, you're not going to compete with aviation fuel from day one, right? That's a 100-year-old industry. So really it's about how do we get the incentives in place to build up capacity, get the technology down the cost curve so that eventually it can stand on its own. I'm going to switch a little bit, and I'm going to, I know you guys know this, which is why you invited me, but I have to always center myself on why I get up in the morning. And the bottom line is we have to bend this carbon curve. We've been saying that for how many years? Yeah, can't get there from here. And the difficulty in this, I think, is I don't think people appreciate that it's not just about reducing our power or our fuel use. 30% of the barrel of petroleum goes to make stuff. This is my Greyhound, her toys, her collar, her bed, everything, her food comes from fossil carbon. And so we've got a distance to go. And I always argue that we need to consider all carbon precious and literally lock it away and only take it out when we need it. We do not need it for the production of power. I think we all know that the levelized cost of electricity is equivalent for renewable power and fossil carbon. There's no reason to waste any carbon on power. Certain fuels, especially aviation, that require density, are going to need carbon for many years to come. And chemicals are always going to need carbon because they're carbon backbones. So your sofa, your shoes, it's all going to require carbon. So we need to think about where we put carbon. And to me, what's important is where this carbon comes from. And the way I think about the world, as I told you, is I believe there's enough waste carbon above ground to make everything we need. And if you think about it, what you're trying to do is transition our energy resources to no carbon energy resources and find alternative sources of carbon, industrial waste, municipal solid waste, biomass, and even carbon, CO2 from the atmosphere. I think this is the transition we have to make, where our power comes from that drives the conversion of the carbon resource and where the carbon comes from. And it cannot keep coming from the ground. I will use my company as an example only to show you what we've done. We can't be the only one that does this, so that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want you to take hope in the fact that it's possible to do some of this today. And so what we do in that center block, we have a bacteria that eats hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide and makes ethanol. And it is a continuous process, not a batch process. So you make beer in a vat and you go away for a few months. This is continuous. Gas in, bacteria eats it, ethanol out. So it's like a refinery unit operation. We take that ethanol and that's how we make jet fuel. We take that ethanol and we make polyester from it. We make surfactants. We can take that ethanol and make all the things we're used to doing. It's not science fiction, I'll show you that. We have used industrial off-gases like a steel mill gas. We've used agriculture residues, plenty of those here in Colorado. Municipal solid waste, you get some of that too. And someday CO2 and hydrogen when all of that becomes readily available. This is actually our first plant operating in China. You can see that's an image. It's an actual picture of the plant sitting in an image. That's not what this guy looks like. This is in Tangshan, one of the most polluted areas in China. And we're plugged into a steel mill. Those are the bioreactors in the background. And it works. We've been running it since 2018. We've built 2 other plants at ferroalloy mills, and we're now starting up a plant in Belgium. You're welcome to go visit. And we're starting a plant in India, and of course a 4th one in China. So we will we will prevent the emissions of 500,000 tons of CO2 by the end of this year when all of these 6 plants are up and running. So it's a gigaton solution. There are gigaton solutions. I have a little video that would have shown you our Ghent plant, but I'm running this in a way that I can't run the video. So, but this is actually what the plant looks like. It's a refinery, and the orange pipe is gas that comes in from the steel mill, and it goes right into the bioreactors. There's a lot of wind power there. At the end of the day, any electricity we want to use, we want it to be green. We then take ethanol that can be made in any way, right? In any type of these waste resources I already mentioned, and we convert that ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel. We're a biology company, so as much as I love jet fuel, we spun the company out to make the jet fuel because it's so different. So we formed a company called LanzaJet. We capitalized it with the investors that you see there. And we're working on building our first 10 million gallon a year facility. That plant is in Georgia, near Savannah, and it'll be mechanically complete at the end of this year. We did a transatlantic flight with recycled carbon, sustainable aviation fuel. We did delivery flight with ANA, sustainable aviation fuel, that was made from recycled emissions. And this is a picture of the facility that's coming up right now that we expect to start operation at the beginning of 2024. You're welcome if you're ever near Savannah. We're about an hour out. And what I want to point out, and the reason I use this example, is because we're trying to create a new carbon economy. And a new carbon economy, this plant is in Soperton, Georgia. There is nothing in Soperton, Georgia. And there are no jobs. There's very little there. It's one of the poorest areas of Georgia. And we're creating jobs, we're increasing wages, creating a new economy.
And
This is
where's
what-
the waste product come from there?
So in this particular case, because we've isolated, we wanted to demonstrate the 10 million gallon a year plant. Near term, we'll be purchasing already available ethanol. But this whole area, the reason we call it Freedom Pines is because it's surrounded by Georgia pine, and there's an old pulp and paper mill that went out of business. So we'd like to use some of those residues and convert those to ethanol, and then that ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel. This is a $150 million capital investment. So we're a small company. We didn't tackle them both at once. So you know what I mean, building the gasifier to take the pine. I do want to make a comment about chemicals. Please don't forget about chemicals. You're talking about airports, and you know, we've taken our ethanol and made clothing and shoes and fragrances and surfactants, and I can tell you, you get a lot of that on an airplane. And so the goal has to be that nothing comes from fresh fossil carbon, and I want you to have that ambition. We've been working on making industrial yarn, the yarn that you would use for seatbelt, or for autos, airbags and things like that. So don't stop your ambition in changing the fuel on your plane. Extend it to changing everything. And I didn't spend too much time, but I showed you hopefully what's possible. We have to rethink carbon. We have to rethink refining. I want you to think of refining as the conversion of CO2, not petroleum. I want you to only focus on using clean energy to do that conversion. And I didn't talk about it generally, but biology, I believe, will be an important enabler because it allows you to take small production facilities and put them at the waste source. You're not going to move these waste resources around long distances. The petro industry has grown around the fact that petroleum is the densest liquid known to man. So you can take it to a centralized location. You don't have to have selectivity because you can afford to have $10 billion worth of equipment converting crude to every product that you make at a refinery. If you're going to use waste resources, you're going to have small facilities at the source. And that means you're going to need the selectivity of biology. But I do think all these things will allow us to make everything we need, from fuel to building materials to shoes. And I would urge you to, as a group, consider that we've gone way too far to incrementalize our way out of this one. It's time to take a leap and just break the model. And I hope nobody kills me for saying that. I know you won't. I'll stop talking now.
Well,
Thank you for
that.
giving me
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
That's amazing. That's probably my favorite Buckminster Fuller quote also. So you hit the nail on the head for me. Questions from our board? I don't see any now. I'm sure we will. Steve, wave your hand or something, or if you had one, I thought you might, but he does have his hand up. Okay, I knew it. Go ahead.
I'm really low tech today, moving my mouse around. So we get our aviation fuel in Aspen comes from a refinery somewhere on the east slope. I can't remember where, somewhere in the Denver area maybe. And I think we have one or more tanker trucks per day, diesel operated tanker trucks operating to bring our aviation fuel to our airport. I can see that there would be a better way to do it, but being practical about it, probably a sustainable aviation fuel processing plant would be somewhere in the Denver area because it's close to DIA, which would use the most fuel, and we would probably have to truck fuel or put it on train cars and bring it to Glenwood Springs maybe and store it there is what I would prefer to do. But how big of a plant, how small of a plant can you do? Would it be conceivable to have one in western Colorado someplace, or do you think it would be more like in a big metro area like in Denver where there's a lot more demand for the fuel and a lot more resources?
So let me answer that question in two ways. One is I believe you get your aviation fuel from the Suncor refinery. I think there's only one refinery in Colorado that makes, I think it makes most of the fuel that Colorado uses, both aviation and ground transport. I think that is connected via pipeline to the airport, Denver Airport. So doing something down there is quite logical. I do not know all the resources that are available here. I can tell you that agri-residues are a really nice feedstock. So woody waste and agri-residues, and I just don't know, I have not studied this area enough to tell you whether there's enough biomass here. But you could use waste wood. I know we have lots of beetle kill. There's a lot of things you could use, and it's just a question of what's the sustainable resource, because you're not going to build a plant to use a year's worth of wood and stop, right? You can't afford that. How small can you make it? You know, the ethanol can be quite small, the ethanol production from woody waste, but you are going to want to do hub and spoke with ethanol produced from wherever the local resources are to a larger centralized aviation plant. So I don't necessarily know that up here you would have the infrastructure for that. And building a plant like that without any infrastructure, it costs you a lot more, right? So there's the unit itself, and then, you know, getting enough power and tankage and all these things that exist in refineries. I haven't done a study of this area, so I can't tell you what's possible, but
Yeah. So there is a waste to energy plant in Gypsum, which is about maybe 50 miles away from Aspen.
what do they use?
And
What do
they're burning, I think they're burning the waste, like wood chips, I think, from logging operations, and they're already creating electricity from that, but that could be a place that it could be converted
Absolutely.
into making ethanol right
Exactly.
there.
Exactly, that infrastructure of bringing in the raw material that they're using to make the power, and then converting that to ethanol instead. And it's just a question of size. And I'm sure you have lots of trash around here and there as well. And so a municipal solid waste site is also a great resource. Combine it with some woody waste, you should be able to get enough. But it's always good to study it. I don't want to speak out of turn and lead you astray.
Can you speak a little bit to, you know, the past conversations we've had, Jennifer, about having a facility maybe in the Commerce City area that works with DIA, and, you know, what the possibilities would be there?
Yeah, Suncor is actually one of our investors, and we've looked at that plant and haven't made a lot of progress on convincing them to do a jet facility there. Maybe all of us together can do it. There are other areas in Commerce City that also are industrial enough to be able to handle a process like this. And then you would produce the ethanol either from municipal solid waste there or from the agriculture in the western part of Colorado, like where there's a lot of agri-residues. Those are the things you could do. I would also say that location is actually really nice because of the pipeline straight into DIA, and that'll save you a lot of money than trucking. And I know you're quite focused on getting aviation fuel into Aspen Airport, which I would be too if I were you. The one thing I'd ask you to consider is that as we're developing this industry and growing the amount of fuel that is available, sustainable aviation fuel, that a lot of people do use book and claim approaches, where you are, the airport or the airlines will buy, or the private planes, I know there's some here, you buy the fuel, but you don't actually put it into your plane. And I know that's not ideal, but you've contributed to growing an industry that eventually will easily get you fuel here. And right now, since you're competing with petroleum, the easiest thing to do is to make this as cheap as possible. And you save, if, 10 cents in transport, that helps a lot, right?
What do you call that business model for doing that?
What did you say?
What do you call that business model for doing
book
that?
and claim.
Okay.
Book and
So
claim.
you would buy the SAF in Los Angeles, might get used in Los Angeles instead of trucking it here,
Right.
but you get the credit for it.
You get the credit because you've paid the premium for it.
So less fossil fuel is used in Los Angeles as a result.
Exactly.
So the net outcome is the same.
Exactly.
Right.
And you don't have to use the special trucking or anything else to get it from Los Angeles versus you're getting from your local refinery, right? Denver to here is a lot easier than Los Angeles to here. So a lot of people do book and claim. And I don't think long-term that's the solution, but I think to try to develop an industry, I just want you to put that in your heads
To
as well.
scale it up.
Consider.
We've done carbon offset, and that's kind of like a carbon offset,
It is.
right?
It is exactly.
What we're finding out, and what we found out nationally, to everyone's embarrassment, is often those offsets really don't mean anything, and so it seems like that industry would have to be very tightly regulated in order to guarantee that we were getting the result.
Absolutely, no
Right.
question about that. And actually, that's very doable. Most of the production facilities are Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterial or ISCC certified. So people are looking at what the feedstock is that comes in, what the product is that goes out, how it's handled, what the life cycle is, right? Because you have to, a lot of people do a life cycle analysis based on a plant that is being designed. But once you build it, it might use more water, it might use more power, it might use more something or less. And so this auditing process is about all the inputs, all the outputs. So you would have a pretty robust process.
Got it. I understand it here. I'm going to keep asking questions until somebody else raises their hand. I understand that here we probably use about 10 million gallons or slightly under that gallons of
Is
fuel.
that what you use in Aspen?
I think our airport uses
I
about
didn't
that.
check.
That's my guess.
That's
We can ask the experts.
correct.
What, do we have an official number? 8 to 9-ish. Okay, so we're
Okay.
in 8 to 9 million gallons used in estimate, used here locally. Now, if we have a demand that large, and I'm sure Eagle probably has a similar, if not larger, demand, and they're 60 miles away, and I'm just wondering, is the demand large enough that we could
Put
actually
something
think of having a centrally located Western Slope plant, as Steve says?
Yeah, well, I know that, my husband lives in Leadville area, so I know there's a lot of forest and there's a lot of MSW and there's a lot of biomass, right? We have a big agriculture sector here in Colorado that there's a lot of waste.
How much jet fuel is your plant envisioned to produce?
The first one we're building is 10 million gallons.
Oh,
It's
we'll
a 10
take it.
million gallon a year. Yeah, just there you
move
go.
it over.
Actually, that's right. Actually, you can tune it to produce some diesel
Send it to
as well.
Florida for all the people that come to
Exactly,
Aspen.
exactly. Now, I do want to point out, though, if you're actually going to put it on your plane, these fuels are certified to 50%.
Right, that was my next
Yeah,
question.
so you would not be able to put in your plane more than 50% of this. Right now, all the ASTM certified fuels have to be blended with 50% kerosene.
Has it been that way for long, or has it come up from 10%, say?
No. Always, the very
50
first one, the HEFA, the first one we did was 50%.
Okay.
Do you see that changing in the near future or not?
It will not change until we can.
Scale up.
One is, that's true, we have to run into that problem. It's a good problem to have that we can go beyond 50, but I think to use these at 100%, you're going to need to be able to guarantee planes that don't need those aromatics. Because that's what you get when you also blend it with petrol. You do two things. You get the right density, and you get the right aromatic. You get
Right.
enough aromatics that you can not have to worry about being outside of the parameters all those planes were designed.
Got it.
That would be a great problem to have.
Yeah, well, so what I'm wondering is, how can we, advocate for this locally? We've got our local, it's great to hear what the global situation is. You've presented that very well, and what you're doing nationally, which is fascinating. How can we move forward on something like that? As a commissioner, as the county, I don't know how much it has to do with developing our airport, but it has on, I'm not sure we can make a demand of the market for the FAA. What are the rules about, could we just say sustainable aviation fuel from this point on and that's it?
Yeah, and I think it would be important to talk to people to have worked in LAX, for example. LAX gets that continuous feeding of sustainable aviation fuel. I don't think you have to do much. You may need a tank to isolate some of this if you wanted to, or if for whatever reason, but I don't think you need more than that. Do you know?
That, as far as I understand, we don't need anything additional infrastructure-wise. I think our biggest problem is actually getting a hold of the stuff.
Right.
Getting a hold
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, there's just not enough out there.
And right now, I think it's coming from California. That's where it's manufactured
You're
presently.
getting
Is
it
that
from World Energy,
Yeah,
Bakersfield.
And that's the oil, the cooking.
Yeah, that's all
Yeah,
animal fats and
that's
greases.
the older technology. Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to add too is, at this point, and I can see if Jennifer can, add anything on here, I think getting to our emissions reduction goal of, greenhouse gas emissions, I don't see how we're gonna get there without sustainable aviation fuel, because the electric technology is not there yet, and it's such a big part of, what our goal is and what aviation relies on.
Right. Well, as we see the industry, not necessarily the aviation industry, but the industry pushing for hydrogen production and sourcing it from water, which is a scarce resource for us in the West, or dubious forms of taking it from petroleum, which doesn't seem to actually do anything for the carbon balance. I think we should be skeptical about all new technologies, especially with their promising green hydrogen, because where it comes from is such a question. Carbon sequestration is also, that carbon capture is a great idea that, it's kind of like vaporware at this point. I think you would know what's happening there, but how soon can that scale up? So all these things look like they may be 10 years out to or beyond before we see scale.
They will scale because they have to.
Right.
At the end of the day, and I know a lot of people don't like direct air capture as an example, I'll just toss that out there. If we don't pull carbon out of the air, we got a big problem. So even if we stop emitting today, we got to pull carbon out of the air. So, but these are, all I would say is Colorado has the agriculture residues. You've already told me there's a woody waste plant. We know there's municipal solid waste, and I think we should just ask ourselves the question, can we do something like this here? I think the idea of splitting fuel, if you want to think about Aspen and Vail, but I also think we shouldn't forget what Jackie has keep pushing me to do, which I have failed, I will admit, is to try to do something in Commerce City. Because at least, if you can start helping Denver, DIA, start to use sustainable aviation fuel, you've impacted all of Colorado, even if you're not putting it on your planes here. There are models that are used. So if you ask me what, I think, Steve, you've got your hand up. I was going to say something else, but if you want to jump in, feel free. I can stop.
Well, it seems to me that maybe the best thing we could do immediately is to start purchasing the SAF in Los Angeles and have them burn it there, and we get credit for it. It's similar to buying electricity produced at wind farms in Nebraska. The electricity doesn't actually get here. We get credit for it. We're supporting it financially. And we could start doing that immediately, where we aren't actually burning the sustainable aviation fuel here in Aspen, but we're getting credit for it. And then as it becomes available, we can start actually trucking it here and and putting it on sale.
Steve,
So maybe we should be pricing our fuel sales for as if they were SAF, even though they aren't at this point. That's what I would suggest we think about.
If I can, I don't want to overstep my strange relationship regarding my recusal from conversation about the FBO. But I believe we're already doing that, or at least our FBO contractor is buying SAF already. And
We buy SAF and we've been booking claiming for over a year.
Okay.
okay,
So-
all right. So it's being
That's what I
done.
thought.
And they can, yeah.
Okay.
I'd invite you up, but I'm worried about my own. Thank you. All right.
Couldn't help but shout out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, so
Thank
thanks
you.
for the clarification. So we're already doing it with the SAF. I see Francie has a question also.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jennifer, for this presentation. I have a question about the impacts on the community where you are building these plants, or where we may have a new plant in Colorado. What kind of emissions are there, and what fuels go into the operation, not the product, but the actual operation?
Mm-hmm. So let me split this into two parts. The first part is the fermentation, the production of the ethanol. And of course, you can use other ethanol. Lots of other people know how to make ethanol. So you can combine all ethanols, not just our ethanol, to convert to jet fuel. So the way we make ethanol, it's a bacterial process. We recycle 90% of the water. The rest of the water, the only output is wastewater. What we do is we anaerobically digest the organism in the wastewater, and that allows us to make some CNG, and we use that to run the distillation. So it's quite self-contained, purposely self-contained. If you choose to, you can actually recover the biomass. So in this bioreactor, the bacteria is dividing. And so what that means is you're going to plug your reactor if you don't take some out. So we take bacteria out as a function of time, and we dry it, and we sell it as animal food. It's 90% protein. So those are the potential outputs: ethanol, protein, and CNG, although we tend to use all the CNG. It does use water. It's a very small amount of water relative to refining. It uses electricity. That is its biggest user. That's the biggest thing we use because it's mostly compression energy, right? And that means you run your compressors on electricity, and you're moving the water around, and you're moving the bacteria around. So you really need power. And so the fact that we have access here to a lot of renewable power is very good. These plants are self-contained. We really don't use anything toxic, because anything toxic would kill the bacteria. Anything that kills us will kill the bacteria. So that's the way you should think about it. And so it's actually a pretty innocuous system. The second system is much more like a refinery process, the conversion to jet fuel. So that will come with the need, well, we need environmental permits for the first piece too, but that will come with the need for similar permitting as in a refinery, which is why Jackie's thought of trying to do something in Commerce City is good, right? Because those are all permitted. But I think, as with everything else, you do a community assessment and so on, right? To make sure. This is the second step looks like a refinery. This first step is much more benign, but also has that look of a refinery.
Got it.
You have to do the community assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How pure is the waste carbon going in?
So if you're using a municipal solid waste, it's pretty dirty, right?
Is that like, should we think of that as landfill waste, or are we thinking of like sanitation waste?
Sanitation waste, if I'm thinking of the same thing you're thinking, has a lot of water. Mm-hmm. So before you gasify it, you have to dry it. So we'd have to look at the energy intensity of drying it if we wanted to use sanitation waste. That can be pretty energy intensive. That might not be the right solution for sanitation waste. But trash, household waste, is perfect. Woody waste, perfect. Agri waste, perfect. One of the things I really want to do is apparel. You know, recycle apparel. We've gasified apparel. We make polyester from these waste gases. And so we've also worked with clothing companies where we can take the clothes back or the shoes back rather than throw them away and again put it in the cycle. By the time it's a gas, the bacteria doesn't know where it came from. And so all of these things can be dumped into a system, turned into ethanol, and then that ethanol to jet fuel.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. So Jackie, what's next?
Well, I know that there were some questions that were submitted by Auden and others, and I don't know if those have been included in all this, but I know that Auden had sent something around that was a little skeptical about sustainable aviation fuel, and I'd certainly like to make sure that those questions get addressed.
Okay, I don't have those questions in front of me.
I do.
Okay, great. Well, if you want to run through them, and if you can talk about the genesis of the question, or that'd be great. But otherwise,
And then if
And Rick's
Rick
here,
Heedy
right.
has any questions, I would love Rick to
sure.
jump in as
And-
well.
And Jonathan, for that matter, as well. I didn't mean to stifle you since you're here, but if you wanted to,
Do you want to pass me a note and I'll ask your
there
questions?
you go. You can pass notes to Kelly.
To Jonathan.
How's that? Okay, great. Go ahead.
So let's start with Auden's questions.
Yeah, we've got
Auden's
about half an
questions.
hour, so that's
Okay.
great.
I started with the first one. I'm not the best person to talk about SAF.
Here.
I would encourage, you can ask the
I
question.
can ask the question. I don't know if my mic needs to get turned on.
Red light.
I'll use Jennifer's mic. You are from the sustainable aviation fuel industry. Why are you the best person to talk to us about the pros and cons of SAF?
Well, I told you, I've hung out with the aviation industry all my life, and so I've learned from the airline folk and OEMs. I would encourage you, if you want to talk SAF, Boeing would love to come and sit at the table with you, the round table for sustainable biomaterials. I can get you engaged with other people who can give you different perspectives than I have, if you'd like. I'm happy to do that.
And I'm just going to add that in my conversations over the years with Jennifer, she as a young girl came from Colombia, is that right? And her father was in the aviation business, and she developed the technology for, the initial biofuels. So that goes a long way in saying why she's here today.
By the way, that plant you're buying, Book and Claim, that was my first license. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
You got to come up to the microphone, Jennifer, just to make sure, so we've got you.
No, I was just kidding.
You
That
have
was
a
that,
background in biofuel.
that Book and Claim plant that you guys are doing work with, the World Energy. That was my first license of aviation fuel. So that was the technology.
If we're going to solve climate change, we have to stop burning things. If the entire world switched to sustainable aviation fuel and its equivalent for cars and trucks, emissions would remain the same as they are today. How would this solve climate change?
And I absolutely agree. I just don't think we're going to be flying airplanes on electricity anytime soon, and so this is a step to reducing it. I would also say that as we develop CO2 conversion approaches, that will also help close the cycle. And I would urge you not to dream of a future where CO2 is the only feedstock that's completely recycled for aviation fuel. That's enough years away. Don't let that be a call to inaction with using the feedstocks that you have available today. But I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I said it. We're burning it. We know that. But at least you're starting with something other than fresh fossil carbon. And that's a first step in the journey.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Is there some reduction gains related to, like when I think about waste produced from landfills, like methane waste or something, instead of letting it sit in the landfill and producing methane to becoming a waste fuel that contributes to any meaningful reduction?
That's actually a really good question, and I think I heard it. I'm struggling to hear you well, Kelly. But if I make a bottle of plastic and I bury it, I've locked in the carbon. If I take that trash and I recycle into fuel, I create emissions. So that is true. But we can't just bury all our plastic bottles. We might as well reuse them to make other things, even if it's fuel. Because, we don't want to live, we're exporting all of these things to Thailand or Vietnam or some other place where people are having to have to deal with them. And I think landfill in oceans and all of these things. So I'd love to hear your views on it, but my feeling is any carbon that's already been dug out of the ground, burying it back in the ground, all it does is incentivize us to keep pushing more carbon out of the ground. And I'd rather use all that trash, even if the fuel makes CO2, at least I'm not taking fresh new carbon out of the ground. And as we develop CO2 conversion technologies, we'll handle that. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, we could we probably will have a conversation about this later, but there is, we have to turn off the fossil fuel production. And, with things like reusing all our trash is one way to get to the future that maybe doesn't have any fossil fuel production. And I wanted to ask a follow-up too, just about your knowledge about electric aviation. And, you did say something like you couldn't get across the pond with electric aviation, but, you could probably get to Denver to Aspen. And, how long will that be, and how many people will be able to be, what's the technology in the airplane industry? Do you know?
It's pretty far along, actually. There's a lot of small aviation companies making electric aviation. I am a massive, capital M, fan of electric aviation. I think it will have an important role to play. I think it'll displace two things, actually. One is these short-haul flights, like you said, but also driving. If you can really get to zero-emission aviation, right, between now and, say, 2025, 2030 on these small hauls, why would you ever drive some of the, you could start to serve these small airports and not have to drive. I know that makes, you know what I mean? I mean, to me, my view is that we can start displacing some automobiles as well with these 20-seater electric planes, right? And some of these 1 hour distances or 2 hour distances that people drive over 8 hours become milk runs, So there's a lot of things we can start to displace with electric aviation.
Steve has a question.
Yeah, my question has to do with the CO2 emissions, say from a power plant or a steel mill or something, any manufacturing thing that has a smokestack that's emitting CO2. It seems like an ideal situation right now would be if we could capture that CO2 and use it in your process. Is that possible, or does it have to go through another step of the carbon capture from the CO2?
Yeah, the problem, and we are doing it, we're building plants to do exactly that, CO2 plus hydrogen. You just have to be careful where you first put them, because you've got to get hydrogen, and the green hydrogen requires water. So CO2 is my dream feedstock, and efficient electrolyzers are my other dream, and then we can go put those two together and make products. So yeah, those are perfect feedstocks for us. I just am not focusing on those right now as one, availability of electrolyzers and water here in Colorado, so I'd rather focus on trash and agri-residues. There are places where you can use, companies like Siemens are doing a great job on green electrolyzers and have done quite a bit of work, and I wouldn't discount CO2 plus hydrogen. I'm just saying I'm prioritizing agri-residues here in this state.
I had a question.
Okay.
It's
Thanks.
probably not the purview of our airport discussion, but it seems that it would be great to have, the ability to incentivize people. We'll do what we can to incentivize people to start taking advantage of of agri-residue and all that. That might be a separate question. My question for our airport people who are here is, are we doing everything possible to be prepared for the advent of electric aircraft or sustainable aviation fuel? You know, it sounds like to scale up to the volume of fuel sales, we'll be ready before the fuel industry is. But I just would love to hear what you'd have to say, Dan, about, you know, where are we in our RFPs going forward and our design for our future modern airport that we're talking about?
Well, the first step on that, as you know, is going to be the airport layout plan, getting that approved before we can even move into some of these things, because the FAA, regardless of the funding for it, the FAA still needs to approve us actually installing some of its infrastructure on federally obligated property, which the airport is. So that's the first step, really. We can't do a whole lot until we get past that point. Plus, and I'm assuming maybe this is a question for you, Jennifer, is, you know, to go to full SAF, 100% SAF, I'm assuming that's the aircraft manufacturers such as Boeing and Airbus and General Electric and all that are developing engines on newer aircraft that do not require the aromatics, that can burn 100% SAF. So that's another aspect. We'll need to get to newer aircraft technology
To be able to burn it.
and to be able to burn it as well.
Yeah, and I think it's mostly retrofits like winglets.
Mhm.
So I think that's what they're imagining, but you need to talk to the Boeings and the Airbuses to see what they're imagining.
Sure. And I read some of the professional journals that talk about, you know, test flights on 100% SAF and things like that. So I'm assuming those are newer aircraft engines that wouldn't be on the existing fleet that we're using now, things such as that. But as far as electrification and preparing for that, you know, a lot of that's going to just be the redevelopment of the airfield, whether it's the terminal and the FBO and some other things like that, that we'll need to bring that infrastructure in, the microgrid and enhancements to that as well. And all that's predicated on the airport layout plan, unfortunately.
And connection to the main, you know, power grid
Yep.
in general needs to go, I think it needs to be 3 or 4 times capacity.
Oh, yes.
As we move toward electrifying, not just for the airport. Regarding aromatics
Hey,
again.
Greg?
Yeah, sure. Rich?
I might add that, you know, the Board of Commissioners, with your adoption of the resolution, there's a really robust set of recommendations within that came out of the Common Ground recommendations. It talks about electrification and kind of the steps to get there. So as you guys know, that's kind of our Bible that we try to follow here. So we can certainly pull up a lot of that for the public to see because that's going to be included, as Dan mentioned, when we start through this ALP and really get into the more specific capital design. We're going to be focused really intently on those recommendations.
Great, thank you, Richard. My
May I make
response to that would just be that we're hoping the FAA reads the same Bible.
Can I,
Yeah.
can I just ask you a question? Another thing that actually helps on fuel consumption and everything else is flight plans. Have you been working with the FAA on the more direct flight plans that enable that?
We have some difficulties around here with the terrain. So, and we're one way in, one way out. So flight plans are very difficult in and out of here. Plus, we're so close to Denver's, and the vast majority of our flights do go from here to Denver. And that traffic congestion in the airspace around Denver makes it a little difficult. And the FAA, I'll be honest, has slipped a bit on their next gen program, which is going to be a very efficient way of getting aircraft from point A to point B. That is probably 20 years behind, unfortunately, from where it was supposed to be at this point. But yes, they're slowly making enhancements to it, but it's slow.
Because that can make a big difference.
That could make a huge difference. Yep.
If we've got a little time here, and if Rick, I was going to say, Rick Peedy, who you may know if you haven't met Rick.
We still have a couple questions from Audie.
Oh, we
but
still have
I'll
some
let-
questions, but come join us, because I want to make sure you have
And
it.
Howie has a couple questions.
Yeah, I'm so glad you came in today. Thank you. Should we finish Jennifer's questions, and then we'll.
Is it plausible that there will ever be adequate, appropriate feedstock to produce the amount of fuel required versus using palm oil and other food crops? When would that occur? I think you already answered that.
I answered that.
Yes. You're in the field of biofuels. My guess is you support their use and advocate for it. Who's your worst but most legitimate critic? Who is the most balanced expert you know of who is not on one side or the other in this conversation?
Well,
Put her on the spot.
no, but actually, I think the biggest critics are often NGOs, right? But those are your best friends because, you asked about certification and RSB, and all of these things that we do are guided by the concerns of some of the NGOs that they're bringing up, right? We learn from that. This is how we learned that first generation crops weren't the future, right? Is because they started to highlight what the life cycle meant for that. So I think there's a lot of critics of biofuels. I would tell you that waste-based biofuels, are important for us to consider.
And now I have a couple questions for Howie Mallory, and I think we've already answered these, but to get a sense of scale, how much SAF fuel should be sold annually? We talked about that for a reasonable 30% emissions reduction goal. If we're at 9 million gallons, we're going to want to be able to put in 3 million gallons. What would be the infrastructure impact for the FBO?
I think you guys answered that.
Yeah, I think we did answer that. And then...
Who else is doing stuff?
Oh, yeah. Where was that question? Which airports have an emission reduction program based around SAF? Are there any notable successes and equally notable failures?
So LAX, I think SFO is doing things.
That's San Francisco, right?
Well, San Francisco, yeah, thank you. And then one of the things, London Heathrow is doing a lot of work. They've set some money aside, and so if an airline does either book and claim or puts fuel into their planes, they're actually offsetting their gate fees because they have a fund to offset their gate fees to incentivize those airlines to use sustainable aviation fuel. There's all of these buying programs, I'm sure you've seen them, right, where corporates will buy. It will pay extra for their tickets so that you can buy sustainable aviation fuel. So there's a lot of things like that going on. I don't know of too many failures.
Can I ask a related question? I'm wondering, how is the demand matching up with the opportunity? So, if you want to buy, can you buy? If Pickens County wanted to procure, can we book, whether it's delivered here or elsewhere?
More and more is being built out, but the demand outstrips the production capacity. But you kind of need the demand first, because then if you commit to buying that fuel, somebody will build it, right? They can go to a bank and say, I can sell this fuel. So you kind of need to create the offtakes first. You need to create the demand to get people to build.
So we might need to think about, we're buying future availability rather than current.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay.
That is correct.
One more question from Steve, and then I want to give Rick a chance to.
Okay, thanks. These questions keep popping into my head. I don't have them written down on paper. If we could burn a mix of the 50% SAF from all the planes leaving Aspen, what would the impact be on our air quality around the airport, which is a big concern of local residents here?
You mean soot? If you were,
I think the aromatics and just the odors from burning jet fuel, Jet A, it comes out, they're taking off. I think a lot of it maybe goes through without getting burnt. So there's a lot of bad smells and particles that are maybe not good for human health around the vicinity of the airport. And that has local residents very concerned.
well, if you really are flying, so not book and claim, and you do 50%, then you're going to reduce significantly your aromatics, right? 50% of the fuel is kerosene. The other 50% will be this stuff, which is sulfur-free. So you won't have some of the smells. You won't have the soot. You really dramatically decrease the soot. And you will decrease the contrails. So if you live near an airport, that's a big deal.
Right, thanks. Good question, Steve. Okay, you have more there? Or
There's, I mean, nothing that I don't think Jennifer's already addressed.
Okay. Rick, welcome. And Rick, if you could, I'd like to introduce you, but I'll get it wrong. But Rick has been working on carbon accountability now for a decade or more, or two.
Yes, I run a small nonprofit called Climate Accountability Institute, where we work on holding fossil fuel companies accountable for climate damages and climate impacts. And I also have a long history of accounting for emissions from municipalities like Aspen or other resorts or airlines or industry, steel mills, for example. And I want to echo the sentiment that I think SAF is very important for us. And you just mentioned the reduction in particulate matter pollution and soot and with aromatics. And ultrafine particles is an emerging concern in this community. So in the RFQ and RFP that we will issue, we want the consultants to be able to measure UFPs.
Yeah.
So I think using SAF here becomes a premium.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe call me Altstall, but I would like to buy the SAF fuel, continue the supply chain to here, and burn the fuel in our own jet aircraft. So the question I have is, do all the vendors, yourself included, have a reliable, certified life cycle carbon footprint, carbon dioxide equivalent footprint for their product?
Absolutely.
So if we buy a tanker from LAX, for example, or from Bakersfield, do we know the full life cycle of that tanker truck?
Well, I can tell you that we don't sell anything, whether it's polyester or ethanol or SAF, that is not RSB certified. And now we're starting to get ISCC certifications because some people prefer those, but everything we do is audited.
Yeah. And also you mentioned displacement of people driving by car from Denver, for example, and I ran some numbers some years ago, it might be slightly out of date, but driving your average car from Denver to Aspen is twice the CO2 emissions than hopping on a CRJ 700
Absolutely.
on average.
Yeah, and that's why I made the comment about I'm really excited about electric aviation because if we can take the excuse to drive that distance period, right? It's already bad. It's already worse than flying, right? And if you can do it on electric planes, it's a massive win, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Well, I want to thank you for all your good work in getting this industry off its feet.
We're trying, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for coming to present to us. And thank you, Jackie, for inviting her in and making it happen. So what would it take? Here's the question. What would it take to have as much SAF as we need at ASC going forward? Or do we already have that?
We don't have it. My understanding is we never have 50%
No,
loads.
they don't sell 50%.
Yeah, but we can't.
It won't produce it.
It won't produce.
We can't
It-
mix
it's-
it ourselves here, like get it and mix it.
That would require a different licensing and all kinds of stuff with the state.
Right. I'm just wondering if that's something to contemplate. If we're really trying to reduce our soot and our emissions at our own airport and we could actually run 50% SAF, what would it take to actually do that? Because it would, one, reduce the amount of pollution that people in Woody Creek are experiencing or elsewhere by 50%, as I understand it.
Well, and for the FBO, it's far more important to create the market, like you were saying, to get it
Right.
out there, to get people used to buying it, and that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years. So
Right.
really agree with that and get it going to the.
You should come up to a mic if you're, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I shouldn't be up there. I shouldn't be
Well,
up there.
thank you. This is Jonathan from Atlantic. Yeah, thank you for that. So it sounds like we're already doing it, but it sounds like we could do more. And the question was, what if we just put it to 50%? What would it take to do that?
Well,
Is that a
and I'll let
technical
Jennifer
question?
jump in too, Greg, but I think that like the idea of us trucking any fuel in from LA to improve our own air quality is kind of a silly way of doing it. So what Jonathan's talking about is doing the book and claim idea where we're paying for that fuel to be used out of
Right.
there. And I mean, we've talked a little bit about how that's probably a better idea because then you're not
Right.
trucking it here for that. So
It
what
doesn't
I
solve
would
our air
suggest is
problem,
we
though.
start talking about how do we make, a production facility in Commerce City, or, if it's a smaller one, that we share with Eagle County and Grand Junction or something like that.
Right.
And I think that that's actually moving in the really progressive and,
Sure.
Positive direction.
Right, I appreciate that. It doesn't solve the
A
air quality.
question
right off the
on
bat.
that regard. United has made a commitment to using increasing amounts of SAF, some billion gallons worth. So they have a big hub in Denver, obviously. Could they participate in the discussions with Suncor? And
Absolutely.
Great,
I-
thank you. Rich has his hand up, and then we're going to have to end this,
Okay, I'm
as
leaving.
much as I'm enjoying the. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Rich.
good, thank you, Greg. And maybe the approach of the buying it elsewhere may solve this, but to kind of coattail on Kelly's ask about if the county were to purchase this directly. Jennifer, I'm just curious, normal operations, usually FBOs provide the fuel for airports. If the county got into the game and was deciding to run the operations ourselves, how difficult is it for us to purchase directly outside of not going through an FBO? Do you know? Or maybe that's an unfair question. I just didn't know if they've locked up for years gathering this SAF for their different airports.
No, I don't think it's locked up because there are more facilities being built all the time, right? So you just have to put your hand in one that's getting built. But I don't know. I really don't know how the county could participate. I haven't thought about those things or have background or, what the government would allow or not allow, right?
Yeah.
Something to look at. So what does it cost to build an SAF plant?
What is it?
What would the cost of a plant be? The smallest SAF plant you could imagine, what would it cost to build?
I wouldn't
produce
build
5 million
anything less
gallons.
than I wouldn't build anything than less than 10 million gallons a year, and I would say it, depending upon where you put it, you'd probably be 80 to 100 million dollars.
Got it.
It's not cheap. It's
So that would
building a
provide
refinery.
Vail's SAF and ours
Yeah.
for that.
But if you have the offtakes, you don't have to provide the funding. People can raise the cash for it. I have partners like Brookfield that if there's a business sense, they will invest in these projects. I think we just have to decide, we just have to understand where it's going to be and how it makes sense. There are things in Colorado that are good in that feedstock is available. There are things in Colorado that are not as good, right? If you're going to get $1.50 credit in Illinois, you're not going to build it in Colorado, right? You're going to be much better off in trying to get the cost competitive in a place like Illinois. But, if you're willing to pay that difference for the fuel, I don't know, right? We can build the business case. We can work together to build a business case, and then you can say, we can work together to get it done or not. But I wouldn't try to throw numbers around.
Right.
I would instead say, okay, what does my ideal project look like? And see if it makes sense or not today
Right.
or maybe 2 years from now.
Got it. Well, we're trying to solve an air pollution issue here, so that would require the SAF to be burned here. And who would do the work on that? Would that be something you do, the research on the market for the raw material?
I can work, but I need
who's going to make the
somebody-
next step here?
I mean, I can help look at that, but I need somebody here who can tell me what resources are available. It would be
Yes, a
very
new
hard for
project.
me to know that.
That's your job.
No, I think you've got somebody at the county that does that. Rich?
Thank you. I think we better call it a day here, but thank you for that. This is all really intriguing conversation. We'll
Can I
continue.
say one more
Oh,
thing?
Kelly has
And,
something
yeah, I
else.
mean, I guess I would just offer, Jackie, I feel like, a very simple next step could be a casual conversation with other folks around the state who might be interested in this topic, in Adams County, in Eagle County, in Mesa County, perhaps, that just would be eager to learn more as a way to sort of test, sort of elevate people's knowledge about the topic and start to decide if this is something we would explore together. I would offer to help coordinate that.
I mean, I think this might even tie into this idea that we're still going to talk about at the next meeting on Thursday about this legislative sort of group and who wants to be a part of that and what are the things that we want to, put into that pot.
Right, yeah. Well, thank you. Food for
Let me know.
thought.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking the time.
Just call us when you've got it done, all right? Okay. Thanks, Jennifer.
My pleasure.
I want to
great.
thank the
Okay, thank
board
you all
for
very
your
much.
interest.
Yeah, well,
Greg
thanks,
and
Rick.
then
Thanks for
everyone on
being
the-
here. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah.
Also,
Great to see you. Thank you.
I'd love to pursue this. I don't know if that's something I would do as a county commissioner, but I'm really interested. We're going to move along here. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks for being here. We're going to move along to department, where are we? We're in department updates and board membership reports. Patty's in Scotland, so my guess is she'll report on single malt or something like that. But we'll skip that and move to Francie. Are you
She's
ready?
actually back. Patty's back, but she is
back? Oh.
preoccupied with something else today. Yes,
Okay,
she's
got
back
it.
in the States.
All right, glad to hear it.
I only have the thing I talked to you about from BLM the other day, about the fees at BLM sites. For us, it's the campground near Prince Creek, or on Prince Creek, up from the bike parking lot. And then I also heard from Larry again at the BLW, Larry Sandoval, who's asked me to be on a panel, I think it's September 12th, for new BLM employees, along with somebody from Bennett's, Bobert's, and Hickenloop office, as well as Tom Jankowski. So we will be a panel working with new BLM employees that evening. I think it's 2 or 3 hours.
Great.
That is my news from the BLM. And just on a side note, I was at the Frying Pan Caucus meeting last night, and there was a lot of talk. The CPW, Peter from CPW and Kevin from the Forest Service were also there, and Ruben Sadowski had asked in this guy named Daniel to talk about mitigating conflicts between humans and wolves. And he went on for quite a while about some of the mitigation work he's done up in Washington State. And he was talking about harassing elk to get them to move here and shooting wolves with rubber bullets and quite a bit of stuff like that, which indicated that he had no idea what the CPW's plan for wolf management is in Colorado or what you can do, because obviously with an endangered species, the wolf is endangered both in the US and in the state of Colorado. You cannot harass or haze endangered species. And it was a long presentation that he did, and then finally the guy from CPW, Peter, broke in and said, well, wait a minute. And so then we spoke a little bit about what the CPW rules are that were adopted a couple of months ago in Glenwood. I was on my way to one of our meetings and stopped in at the CPW state meeting in Glenwood where it was officially adopted. So there are incredibly strict guidelines, and of course, as you guys know, it depends on the 10J rule whether that's implemented, and he didn't know about that. So it was a funny little interlude at the caucus, and a little bit awkward for people. But other than that, the meeting went great. Kevin spoke about some logging practices that'll be up there, and 2 contracts where they haven't shown up yet and probably won't log this year. Anyway, it was nice to be with the people in the Frying Pan, and that's all from me.
Thanks, Francie. Kelly, I'll just send it to you.
Okay. I'm not going to focus a lot on CCI right now. They're in the process of organizing the recommended priority list for legislation, of which we have 2 items on there for consideration. That process is, the topics get presented to all the districts, and later in the fall they'll get voted on during a steering committee meeting. I will talk a bit about APSHA, I'll cover the ones I won't talk a lot about. CCAT had a summer retreat. The fall retreat will be focused on, I was away for that. Steve attended, I believe. There's plans for a fall retreat as well that will focus on what the policy priorities will be for the organization come the winter time, as well as some in-depth discussion related to authentic Jedi incorporation in the way that CCAT does their work, and that will be a facilitated process. CJCC, we have our next meeting next week, so I don't have anything to report about now. As I do understand it, the consultants have taken all the recommendations that we provided, that other members of the CJCC provided, that public safety staff provided related to programming for a newly, I don't know, updated jail, modernized jail. And so we'll hear about what that looks like. And again, we're very much at the place of we're thinking big, and then we'll tailor based on interest and resources. APSHA. So the day after we had our joint meeting with the city related to housing, APSHA had their board retreat related to housing. That was facilitated by John Doherty. It was some good time, I think, for staff and the board to spend together, sort of revisiting, what our structure is, what the work plan and strategic plan is. APSHA will redo our strategic plan in 2 years, so we were not focusing on redoing that for this retreat, but definitely acknowledge some needs for updates there, as well as just ongoing, confusion in the community about APSHA's role, which is sort of no surprise given that APSHA is just sort of a weird monster in terms of how we're governed. It's a department of the city, but it's governed through an IGA of both the city and the county, with joint appointments as well. We sort of worked through, I think, some differences in prioritization related to the board and staff. And really how I would summarize that is, the staff oftentimes is a lot more focused on kind of efficiency and effectiveness, whereas the board is focused more on community values related to transparency, integrity, accountability. And so how we worked through a prioritization process related to that, and kind of how we're going to look through those lenses when we do decision making. And some of that comes up. I mean, we've had some very clear instances of that where staff has made a recommendation related to some lawsuits that ultimately the board did not agree with. Staff wanted us to settle a lawsuit related to how we affirm and uphold a deed restriction, and the board, took a position of no, like we've defended this in the past, it merits continued defense in the community, because why wouldn't we defend our deed restrictions? Otherwise anyone would come in and try to undermine them in a very generic sort of sense. I'm not sure if I had mentioned this before, but the compliance efforts at APSHA have beefed up. We authorized an additional compliance person that they hired this year. She's a former FBI. I don't know if she was an agent or staff at the FBI, but that her role now is really to dig in to auditing, particularly ownership affidavits. So right now there's every 2 years, owners in the 1,500 unit inventory have to submit an affidavit, attesting to meeting ongoing work requirements, et cetera. So the goal now is to audit those, and that every 5 years a full audit of that inventory will be completed, and that will require submission of W-2s and tax statements and things like that. So I think that is an improvement along that policy area. And that's part of the report that I think will come back when they come and give us a more detailed review of what APSHA has been working on is specifically the number of compliance cases that they have worked on in a year. I think year to date, we're at like 60 compliance cases that staff has investigated and is working to settle, whether that means someone is brought into compliance or a hearing with the hearing officer occurs or people just admit to fault and move out. There's kind of a range of things happening along those lines. And I know our staff would be happy to give, APSHA staff would be happy to give more detail related to that. Additional effort that is happening over there is related to the Burlingame 3 project that is now coming into lottery. So that is 79 units that are all ownership based, and they're a mix of studios to 3 bedrooms and categories 3, 4, and 5. And there was some specific outreach from the community that came through me to APSHA related to beefing up our Spanish language access for APSHA, and so they have made concerted effort to make sure that all of the Burlingame 3 application materials and advertisements are all bilingual. And I've kind of asked them to stay in touch with me related to whether they have enough bilingual staff in APSHA to properly process applications. So far, they think they're good, but that was sort of specifically through Valley Settlement. They have, I don't know if they were on staff, I think they've hired some additional resources to really work with Spanish First applicants on completing their APSHA packet and getting those submitted for Burlingame 3. I think that's it. Any questions on APSHA?
We're busy. It all sounds good.
Yeah, they will be coming. I will just say another, there will be an additional request for an outreach position coming to us through budget this year. And that, I don't know if we talked about that at our joint meeting, but that position is envisioned to work directly with comm staff at the city to kind of dispel some myths related to APSHA and sort of generate broader, clearer understanding on what APSHA does, because there's lots of misconceptions related to that, as well as working specifically with HOAs on how to run a healthy HOA, what the laws are, what good budgeting practices look like. And that relates to what we all talked about with trying to do a good update the capital reserve study for the HOAs. So here, don't be surprised when that comes to you.
I had an interesting conversation with Phyllis at her party the other night, and she was talking about how she happens to have skills along HOA development, and that seems to be like, I don't know if it's where she's in Grand Junction or where she's living, but all of a sudden she's being asked to help form and fix HOAs. So we may have a specialist in our in our midst. We have to hold on to that one.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Is that it?
I think that is it. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go quickly, and I'll probably skip over a few things. But with CC4CA, I just wanted to put the word out to my fellow board members that they send out their email with opportunities to engage and testify. The next one will be today at 4:30 p.m., which is 15 minutes ago, so it's probably begun. It'll probably go on for a few hours, but there are opportunities to testify before the Air Quality Control Commission. CC4CA puts out those requests. There's an August 30th Colorado Public Utilities Commission opportunity to testify on specifically, I'm not sure, it looks like PUC's equity work related for the 2021 law. So equity workshops with the PUC, and that's just an attending an equity workshop. Rural electric co-ops, ERA funding, clean energy, they're asking if we would join on a letter encouraging all of Colorado's tri-state member co-ops to take full advantage of a opportunity to transition our rural communities to a clean, affordable energy future. CC4ICA lobbying tri-state, and so they're asking for us to sign letters. Haven't had an official request. This is just in their bulk email. The greenhouse gas reduction roadmap through CC4CA describes Colorado's plan to meet the state's science-based climate targets of 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050 from 2005 levels. The state's working on an update. I think I mentioned I had a conversation with a group of electeds last week being polled on, where do we think the issues would lie regarding greenhouse gas reductions. And it was a great conversation. We'll get a report from them, and I'll share that when we get that. And then there's also a request from CC4CA to publish opinion pieces, if you're inclined, on greenhouse gases, advanced clean cars, transit-free fare programs, ozone reduction, and more. And there's plenty of opportunities if you want to get involved in that. And I've taken them up on it a few times, and I probably need to re-engage. Okay, I'm going to move quickly to, let's see, our next core board meeting is Thursday morning, and I'll have more to report to you after that. But in a conversation recently with the ED, things are actually going well, and CORE is meeting its obligations regarding the various contracts that are before it. And so we're on track, although we're still a startup, and it's been an interesting year. QQ, I have nothing for you right now. Board of Health, we did have our Board of Health meeting, our quarterly Board of Health meeting last week. We talked about forever chemicals, and the interesting news on that is forever chemicals are with us. They're here. They're in our water. They're in all the water. It's not that you can go find a mountain stream that doesn't have it now, or even a freshwater fish. In addition to that, not to get in too deep, but it's pretty much in everybody's bloodstreams in various quantities. The conversation for me is not about how do we go and detect it and test for it. It's about how do you filter it to make sure it's not in your water. And I think that's a conversation public health will be having, and hopefully we'll be able to make advisements on removing PFAS from your water. And those are the chemicals that are in Teflon and in various lubricants and fabrics and things like that end up going into the water and not coming out. They're finding it in raindrops and snowflakes and pretty much everywhere on the planet at this point. So now it's going to be about filtration. Sorry about that. It's not great news. The Board of Health, really everything on the list was, we talked about the Colorado Healthy Kids survey, and once again, our schools in our area, surveyed through a voluntary survey, had about a 95 or 97% response rate in our high school, and they're pretty confident in their data and the responses. But it seems as if we still have an uptake and acceptance of alcohol and tobacco and marijuana use that is higher than both our region and our state, and higher than the national average. And that's concerning, and work is being done to work on education about that. The one thing that we can see success on is that vaping has gone down since 2017. The incidence of vaping was on an accelerating ascendancy, and that has been leveled off and is actually in a small decline, as I recall. So vaping isn't as popular anymore, but still alcohol, marijuana, and smoking are, and that's still of concern. And I was very careful to, I can't help but believe is there something about our data that's different, the way our kids are responding to the survey compared to other kids in other schools. And Raleigh Backrack was very good at answering those questions, because they're asking the same questions. Why do we have such high numbers? It's not like we're that much different from other resort towns or other communities in the valley, yet we have these very high acceptance of these substances among high school kids. So there's more to learn from that. Let's see. We did talk about the COVID. People have been talking about an upsurge in COVID. And COVID pretty much is considered to be endemic at this point. Our incidence of COVID right now, even though it's elevated, is still about a 15th of what it was last year. So I know our hospital is back on masking. They're seeing it in the ER, they're seeing it in the hospital, and they're taking precautions. But still, the actual numbers are about a 15th of what they were last year. And so while people are noticing that, yes, COVID is still here, it's not resurging with anything like the incidents that we saw even a year ago. So that's just sobering news. It may not be good news or bad news, but it's better than hearing that we have another pandemic coming. It's more that this is just the endemic. Regarding RAFTA, let's see, we had a RAFTA meeting recently. The most interesting things are that the two RAFTA bus drivers who don't want to be recognized, but really were exemplary in that they rescued people. They say one bus driver was instrumental in a domestic violence situation in getting a woman to safety. Another one, I think, I'm trying to remember, was first on the scene at an accident, I believe, down Valley. And we're trying to figure out a way to recognize them in an appropriate way and thank our RAFTA drivers who are really not only climate warriors and driving the buses and getting people out of their cars, but they're also being public safety advocates. And so RAFTA is recognizing that. We also heard a really interesting proposal from Glenwood Springs regarding an affordable housing development in Glenwood that kind of checks all the boxes. It's on the bus line. It's close to walking distance to town. They've got, they're looking at all the energy efficiency. They're really working on solving affordable housing right in the municipal area of Glenwood Springs. And they're looking for partners. And they're going to come back to RAFTA with some proposals on how RAFTA may engage and join them in helping find workforce housing for RAFTA employees. I'm going to move on to RWAPA. We had a RWAPA meeting the other night. Thursday was really busy. And the gist of it was there was a survey among RWAPA members, and April Long, and the director is putting together an action plan, which we will present back to you probably at my next report about the priorities that RWAPA sees ahead and how we can move forward in handling not only the essential jobs with allocations of water from RUDI and aquatic nuisance species control, but also what else can RWAPA do in the watershed, taking advantage of the cooperative nature of the organization, which has memberships in municipalities and counties up and down in our watershed. Let's see, what else do I have? And that's probably it. Oh, Forest Service would be the last one, which I don't have a Forest Service report for you, but I was intrigued, and I hope you all saw the articles about the CPW and their the survey of they have an open public comment open right now on elk herds and deer herds, and they're trying to figure out how to keep our herds balanced. Mortality rate. The mortality rate seems to have been up. What's the birth rate? The birth rate for elk has been severely impacted over recent years, and they've had to readjust how many of animals can be harvested, and they're keeping track on birth rates, trying to balance and find the optimum rate for the elk herds. And I wanted to.
Greg, let me jump in there for just
thanks,
1
Francie.
second.
Go ahead.
CPW is having a meeting. I believe it's Thursday evening at the Eagle County building in Elch Bell. on our local herds. And so if you want to have input into that, you should attend that meeting. I can't remember exactly what time, but it's on the CPW website.
Wednesday, August 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. Thank you for that, Francie, at the Elgibel.
Yeah,
In
and
Elgibel,
so,
yeah.
Peter from CPW was really encouraging people to attend that meeting last night at the caucus meeting.
Yep. The interesting part for me on that is that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, specifically the Avalanche Creek herds population topped out at 8,000 animals. It's been reduced to about 4,500. Those populations are remaining stable. In other areas, they're seeing it seems like the trends are skewing. One, it's impact from human activities and encroachment in habitat. And so they can, they're trying to figure out how to create the optimal balance to balance biological capabilities of the herd, which are changing, and habitat with the public's demand for wildlife recreational opportunities. And I'd have to say, I wanted to add to that just the impact of humanity on our highways, because I think we've seen an increase in casualties with large ungulates and small mammals as well on our highways. So we're going to hear more about all of that. But there's an article in the Aspen Daily News. Maybe I'll share that if it hasn't already been shared with Charlotte, and she can disseminate it to you. That's all I've got for you. Sorry about that. That was a long-winded sentence.
Yeah, Greg, you skipped me.
Oh, I skipped. Oh, I was on my page. Boy, Steve, you were so quiet there. Okay, take it away, Steve. You get to wrap this up.
I could just not give a report, and we could just go on with the rest of it.
I was thinking you would opine on the CPW and elk herds, but go ahead.
So I'll try to be quick on this. At CCI, the Mountain District meeting is in Winter Park next Thursday, which is when the CAST meeting is starting in Basalt at the same. I think it's in Basalt at the same time. So I'm going to be there at Winter Park on Thursday. I guess if someone could let me know what CAST is doing on Friday. No, that doesn't work for me. I will be on a camping trip, so I can't go to CAST anyhow. John Swartout, if you haven't heard, has resigned as the executive director of CCI. And so they have a search going on, a nationwide search. They say they have many applications from around the country for the position, and they are going to be starting doing interviews fairly soon on a short list of those who rose to the top in the applications. Club 20 fall meeting is September 7th and 8th in Grand Junction. I will be going to that, and they have their steak fry on the first evening. Is always a great event that Club 20 puts on. Tomorrow, now there's this odd thing going on that George Newman used to serve on the Nordic Council, and now the Nordic Council has been sending me, including me on their emails, so when their meetings are. Now, the Nordic Council and the Senior Council typically meet at exactly the same time.
Hey, Steve, I've been going to those Nordic Council. I've started going to the Nordic Council meetings. So I think I'm the designee now, and I thought somebody decided that. Okay. But anyway, I've been on that.
Okay, well, good. Because I've been getting the emails, and I've never been able to go to the meeting. So tomorrow will be Senior Council meeting. And since the Senior Center is closed right now, those meetings are held in the Health and Human Services building, where the senior lunches are also being held. On the opioid settlement committee, they have picked a company for handling the data dashboard. And I can't recall the name of the company, but it is one that Picken County Health and Human Services has been working with for data collection already. So I think it will be an easy transition for us having them doing the data dashboard system for the 5 counties in our opioid region. And that's all I have right now for what's going on.
Great, thank you. One last thing I wanted to mention is that tomorrow, Wednesday, there's the Fire Scout wildfire detection demonstration, and I believe that is online. And if you're interested in that, the Aspen Fire District would have the info on that, and I can share that with the board if you haven't seen that. It's at 1 o'clock to 1:50 p.m. tomorrow. And this will be regarding the detection system that is being expanded, as I understand it, to farther down valley.
So one other comment, Greg, you had mentioned the resurgence of the COVID cases, and this singing group, Seraphic Fire, was singing at the Snowmass Chapel on Sunday, and about 1/3 of their members, they had 7 of their members tested positive for COVID and were not able to sing on Sunday. So they only had 2/3 of their group, and their accompanist also tested positive for COVID. So it is still impacting people's lives here, and that's interesting that one group had like 1/3 of their members
Right.
have been testing positive. So it is still here, definitely.
It's worth testing if you're uncertain. I know that at the Theater Aspen, when they reopened the current show, Rent, I know 2 or 3 of their key cast could not fly in from New York last week because they were positive. So I think they've got a full cast in there and functioning now, but it took an extra week to get them here. Okay, if that's it, did you have something else, Francie, or are you good? I think we're about ready to call it a day. Kelly has something.
I'm just gonna ask.
I'm all good. I just was visiting with John and Aaron Ely, who stopped by for a minute, so I missed the last little bit, but
Okay. We'll
I have
catch you
nothing
up.
to add.
All right, we just still have future, or not
Oh, we
future,
do.
open discussion.
See, I was
But,
jumping the gun again.
I'm just gonna send through email via Charlotte, the comments from the state of Colorado, our water commissioner related to the Colorado River Compact on operational guidelines for Lake Mead and Lake Powell that you all might find interesting, that they are in current negotiations about right now.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you've all been receiving, if we just want to shift right into open discussion. I've been getting letters on a couple of topics. One is pro and con on e-bikes on single-track trails. And I've actually made some inquiries with the hospital to get some data on their perspective in the ER on e-bike injuries in particular, but bicycle injuries. And also I've talked to Open Space about what they're seeing. But I'm getting letters from people who think why don't we just reopen or open all of our trails to e-bikes, and then others saying please don't, and outlining why. And so that's a conversation that's ongoing, and we'll probably, I could imagine having a report from Open Space at some point on how the policy is evolving, if it's evolving, or where things are going. As we try to accommodate the growing number of e-bikers, but also try to protect the safety of the non-e-bikers who are concerned about them. And I wanted to, let's see, the other questions I've been getting are local citizens and neighbors who are concerned about wildfire. The Lahaina fire, I think, really was a shocker for everyone. And if you were to ask me before the Lahaina fire, where did I think fire was more likely, I certainly wouldn't have said Lahaina as opposed to my neighborhood or Red Mountain or our outlying areas. And so I think a lot of people are wondering, what do we have for evacuation plans? What's our emergency response plan? Who's doing what on fire mitigation? And so I think we're going to be hearing more from the fire district and Allie Hager, who's specializing in that, coming up. But I don't know if anyone else has been getting correspondence on that, but I've seen it, and I've been sharing it as well with Charlotte. Okay, any other open discussion?
Yeah, I have one. I got an email from Martha Ferguson, who's been working on the Dark Skies Initiative. And she said that she had not received any letter from the BOCC supporting the Dark Skies Initiative, which I thought we had decided to support the initiative that the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus is doing. But can anyone remember what our status was on that discussion? Maybe we were doing more research, I'm not sure.
Steve, if I recall, I think we were gonna check with ComDev and others to see if there was a countywide night sky, but I can follow up with him. Do you have a copy of that letter?
I can send you, I could forward you her, the one she just sent me yesterday.
Okay.
We're having the caucus meeting tonight, and she was hoping to already have some kind of a letter of support from the county. She told me if I even wanted to write a letter of support just as an individual commissioner, that would be better than nothing. I think it would be more powerful if we had a letter from our full board. So I'll forward that to you, Kara.
Okay.
Right.
I'll follow up and we
yeah.
can bring that back.
I keep thinking this is something we've already done and we've checked the box on it and we're moving on and maybe we just haven't. And so I'm sorry to apologize to Martha for that. I would sign a letter individually or together also. Kelly?
I'll just say my recollection of the conversation was to determine if our code already covered what the Dark Skies Initiative would be asking for, or if there were gaps in it. And I don't think we've done that work. So that fell through the cracks.
Got it. Okay, so we're picking that one back up. Tell Martha we're still on it.
Okay, I will pass the information on to her. And if necessary, I will just write an individual letter, but I'll find out more tonight and then I can let you all know.
I'd happily sign on with you, Steve, if you want to
Me too.
put in, yeah, so we can individually all sign it, I guess. Okay, and in that case, if all three of us are signing it, I'm sure we could get two more. So if you're going to write something, send it to Kara.
Okay.
All right, thank you all. Let's see, next on our calendar, I see joint dinner meeting with Town of Snowmass Village, Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Slice Italian Bistro. My guess is that if there's room, anybody else can show up too. It's a public meeting. So that's on our public calendar. And that's all I have today. Yep. Okay, I think we're done. Andor, thank you all. Thanks everybody who hung in there with us. And we'll see Francie back here next time.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for
Thanks.
covering for me, Greg.
Yep, take care.
Bye.